Hello, everyone. My name is Caleb, and welcome to the very first episode of Absolute Falcon Cinema, my very own movie podcast, where I focus on film discussion and the art of cinema. Now, some of you are probably wondering, why should I listen to this guy talk about movies for 15 minutes? Well, I have spent literally years of my life watching movies. I am super passionate about the art of film and how movies make me feel. I come to the movies expecting a lot of spectacle, a lot of interesting world building, and just some interesting work of art that leaves me thinking about it for a while. I think that the beauty of movies comes from the fact that everybody has their own interpretation of movies. Some people enjoy the movie for different reasons. Others may find a personal connection to a character or have a lot of nostalgia towards it. I find that the thing I like about movies the most is how it really is a form of escapism, right? It propels you into a different world for an hour and a half to 2 hours, and you get to escape the world that you currently live in for a much grander one, a much bigger one. And it really manipulates your emotions in the most satisfying ways. And what I mean by that is I think that stories and the art of storytelling is on full display with movies. There is something about the combination of the motion picture and music that elevates film above any other artwork, in my opinion. For example, the most recent movie I watched was a movie called Treasure Planet, and that movie I found to be really memorable for its music. It had a lot of really amazing music, and it tied it together with some really amazing visuals, some groundbreaking animation for the early 2000s, and some really interesting character design. I think that overall, Treasure Planet is a really underrated Disney movie, not one that many people talk about, and it is like a kind of like hidden gem in Disney animation. I think that it means so much to me because of the way it so expertly blends that sort of visual art form with the musical art form to create a powerful moment, a lot of really interesting emotions, and it really makes you invested in all of the characters as well. Another recent movie I watched was Guillermo del Toro's new Frankenstein movie, which I think as of right now is still in theaters, but it will be releasing on Netflix, I think sometime in December. That movie stars Oscar Isaac and Jacob Elordi and Mia Goth, and all of the movie's set design and costume design is so impressive, and it really adds to being completely transported to a different world, that sort of thing. The production design is just unparalleled. Guillermo del Toro is the director of the movie, and it's clear to me that that was a passion project from him. He really locked in with this project and gave it his all, and the finishing product is so fascinating and so satisfying, and it's a very enjoyable movie. I would highly recommend it to any listener who is interested in gothic horror or interesting character performances.
In seeking life, I created death.
Some of my all-time favorite movies include the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the most recent Mad Max movie, Fury Road, and the Spider-Man Into and Across the Spider-Verse movies. Starting with the Lord of the Rings, I think that there has never been a book to film adaptation pulled off in a better way than The Lord of the Rings. I think there is so much passion behind the filmmaking for that trilogy that it's really unparalleled. It's fascinating to hear about all the different production techniques. For example, a lot of the ways that uh, computer generated imagery was progressed through the design of Gollum, as well as some of the unique blending of computer effects and practical effects. They had a lot of small scale models that were used, but on a really large scale. The directors called it bigatures, that was their moniker. And they blended that with a lot of these big armies and these big battle scenes that made it feel very larger than life. The Lord of the Rings is a masterfully done series of movies. I would recommend the extended editions to all of the people who are more curious about its adaptation from book to film, how accurate it got everything, and just how effective it was from transporting that story into a different medium. Phenomenal, phenomenal movie trilogy. I would highly recommend it to everybody who hasn't seen it yet. As well as that, I'm also a huge fan of Mad Max Fury Road. Now, for those of you who haven't heard of the Mad Max franchise, it is the brainchild of a director who goes by the name of George Miller. He had this wild vision of cars wrecking into each other and creating this franchise that really was the first ever interpretation of the post-apocalyptic subgenre. And the Mad Max franchise is really groundbreaking for basically inventing that entire genre. But Mad Max Fury Road sort of elevates that in this really creative and really hectic crescendo. Mad Max Fury Road came out very recently, around 10 years ago now, and it had continued on a series that hadn't had an installment in the franchise since the 80s. So a lot of people had their doubts about how well it would hold up compared to the older Mad Max movies starring Mel Gibson. For the reboot, they recast the character of Max as Tom Hardy, and I think he did a phenomenal job. On top of all this, there's an insane backstory with how the production went. It was a movie that was almost 20 years in the making. George Miller famously drew up the whole movie in storyboards. So every single frame of what you see in the final movie was drawn up back in the late 90s. George Miller and his production team were deep in pre-production as far back as 1997, and they had drawn up storyboards for essentially the whole film without even creating the first draft of the screenplay yet. So that is a really unique way to approach making a movie by emphasizing more of the visual stuff. Usually, a script is written for the movie first, and that is what is pitched to the movie studio. But the unconventional way that Fury Road was conceptualized, I think, adds to the overall quality and uniqueness of the film. Shooting the film in the middle of the desert in around 2012 was hectic. There was a lot of stunts that they did for real, which involved a lot of huge scale car crashes that were really hard to put to film. And on top of that, The whole production crew was pressured by the studio to lower their budget and to remove any senseless violence and keep a PG-13 rating so they could sell it to the most families. However, George Miller went against those and decided to create a final cut for himself with the help of his wife, Margaret Sixel, who had never edited an action movie before, mind you. Mad Max Fury Road had all of the editing and post-production stuff compiled by her, and the movie wouldn't really be the same without her editing. She won an Oscar for that, as well as George Miller, I believe, for Best Director. But the whole process it took to make the movie was such a wild ride that it's honestly insane that the movie turned out as good as it was. A lot of people consider it to be one of the greatest action movies ever made, myself included. And the experience of the movie is unlike anything else I've ever witnessed. So, to those of you listening in, I would highly recommend Mad Max Fury Road. And finally, the Spider-Verse movies. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this because the Spider-Verse movies are some of the most popular animated movies today, and I also think some of the greatest animated movies ever made. This is due to the fact that it is such a unique visual style in the way that it completely changed the animation industry in the late 2010s. I don't know if y'all remember, but back in the early 2010s, Disney and Pixar were really like leading the game as far as animation went. Movies like Toy Story, Coco, The Princess and the Frog, all of those movies were winning awards at the Oscars and racking in billions and billions of dollars. But the genre itself, this sort of bland-looking 3D animated atmosphere that Disney had created was getting a little bit old. And what the directors of the Spider-Verse movies did was they decided to concentrate their entire effort on making Spider-Verse look as close to a comic book as possible. And this led to a really unique blend of digital animation and hand-drawn animation in a way that nobody had really seen before, but one that is visually brilliant. All of the Spider-Verse movies look amazing, and they're also great stories. Spider-Man is known for having a very formulaic story, but a very satisfying story nonetheless. And I think Spider-Verse in particular really turns the story on its head. I think that's a storytelling technique that is supremely underrated, and one that I think a lot more filmmakers should focus on is creating a story that completely challenges the medium that it's in. And Spider-Verse did that in spades. Across the Spider-Verse came along, and I went and saw that in theaters, and it was really a life-changing experience. I rarely see a movie that really blows my mind as much as Across the Spider-Verse did when I first saw it in theaters. The amount of animation prowess on display is just unmatched. As far as the different animation techniques, I saw a lot of watercolor, I saw a lot of collage, I saw all of these elements that I'd honestly never seen in an animated movie before, but one that was so visually breathtaking that I just cannot understate the impact it had on my respect for animation and my hope for the direction that animation was going. A lot of movies, such as K-pop Demon Hunters, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, a lot of modern animated movies have really been taking notes from the Spider-Verse films. That's why I say it has such a big impact on the industry and completely flipped animation on its head, that whole style was so inspiring to so many animation artists around the world. And I think that Spider-Verse is a movie that everyone should watch, anyone that's even just partially interested in animated movies, and one that I think will be studied for generations. Those are all of my favorite films, and I hope some of you got to understand how passionate I am about these films and how passionate I am about filmmaking as an artwork. That's all I have for now. I think I'm going to wrap it up, but I hope that y'all learned something new about filmmaking, about the process of filmmaking, and got to know a little bit more about my taste in movies. If you want more insightful knowledge on filmmaking and different movies to watch, be sure to check out some of my other episodes of Absolute Falcon Cinema. Until then, peace out, y'all. And in case I don't see ya, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.